The smoke in Kravek's private parlor wasn't tobacco. It was crystallized regret, expensive and bitter, the kind that only burned properly when mixed with the tears of bankrupt civilizations. Around the hexagonal table sat the galaxy's most dangerous creatures, each one capable of purchasing solar systems with pocket change, and each one currently debating whether humans deserved extinction or merely enslavement. 17 consecutive defeats, wheezed Gormath the Vile, his 3 lungs working overtime to process both the smoke and his amusement. These humans couldn't tactical their way out of a paper nebula. The Zilani ambassador, resplendent in bioluminescent scales that pulsed with condescension, clicked her mandibles in agreement. My intelligence networks report their fleet commanders still use something called lucky charms during battle planning. Primitive trinkets. It's almost adorable. Kravek himself, a being whose species had perfected the art of profiting from genocide, shuffled his deck of probability cards with 6 hands, while 2 others counted credits. His parlor existed in a pocket dimension tethered to Station Nexus 7, where the galaxy's elite came to wager on matters that would horrify lesser mortals. Tonight's betting pool had reached 800 billion standard credits, all riding on humanity's upcoming annihilation. The hegemony's offering 3-to-1 odds, Kravek announced, his voice like grinding metal. Complete extermination within 72 standard hours. Any takers for the humans? Laughter rippled around the table. If you could call the sound a Keth crime lord made when amused laughter. It sounded more like a fusion reactor having an aneurysm. "I'll take those odds," said a voice from the parlor's entrance. "All of it." The temperature in the room dropped noticeably as every eye, sensor, and probability calculator turned toward the newcomer. Tall, unremarkable, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most planets' annual GDP, the human stepped into the light with the casual confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with sufficient application of mathematics. "Well, well," Kravek purred, his main mouth forming something approximating a smile, while his feeding tentacles tasted the air for fear pheromones. "The accountant graces us with her presence. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to HFY Havoc, hit the bell, and like this video. Because if you want more epic HFY sci-fi stories like this one, you don't want to miss out." The human everyone called the accountant pulled out a chair that hadn't been there seconds before. A neat trick that made several beings reach for concealed weapons. "Gentlemen, ladies, sentient gas clouds, and whatever Gormath classifies as these days." "How did you even get in here?" the Zilani ambassador hissed, her bioluminescence shifting to warning colors. "This dimension is sealed, protected by a Zarian-class quantum lock that uses prime number sequences as its encryption base," the accountant finished, settling into her chair. "Charming technology. Very secure. Unfortunately, your security contractor used a 17-digit prime as the master key, and 17 happens to be my lucky number." Gormath's 3 hearts began beating in a discordant rhythm that his species used to signal extreme agitation. "Nobody just walks into a Zarian lock. The mathematical calculations alone would take 47 minutes, 12 seconds, the accountant said, checking a device on her wrist. "I did it during the shuttle ride over. Had time left to review your betting histories, current credit ratings, and psychological profiles. Fascinating reading, really. Did you know that Kravek's species experiences existential dread when exposed to prime numbers larger than their age? He's been unconsciously avoiding the big bets all night." The room fell silent, except for the gentle hum of reality trying to figure out what the hell was happening. "You magnificent creature," Kravek whispered, his respect for audacity overriding his survival instincts. "What exactly are you proposing?" The accountant leaned forward, her expression never changing from mild professional interest. I want to modify the terms. Instead of betting on humanity's defeat, I propose a different wager entirely. The humans have already lost 17 major engagements, the Keth crime lord rumbled, his biomechanical implants whirring with calculation. Their fleet is scattered, their colonies are falling, and their home system is surrounded. What could you possibly— One human, the accountant interrupted. One ship, against the entire hegemony armada. The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for supernovas and the heat death of universes. You want to bet, Gormath said slowly, on one human ship defeating the most powerful military force in galactic history? A fleet comprising 12,000 vessels, including 17 planet killers and the legendary Worldbane herself. That's correct. And you're willing to stake what exactly on this impossibility? The accountant smiled for the first time since entering the room. It wasn't a particularly reassuring expression. Everything humanity has ever earned, stolen or borrowed in the galactic marketplace. Our entire economic output for the next 1,000 years. Every human colony, every asteroid mining operation, every trade route, every patent on faster-than-light travel. In exchange for? When I win. Not if, when. Humanity gets all of your assets. Every single credit, every investment, every shell company and dummy corporation you've used to hide your wealth across 17 galaxies. The Zilani ambassador's scales had gone completely black, a sign of either extreme fear or extreme excitement. That's approximately 43% of the galaxy's total economic output. The Tauga financial disruption alone would collapse half the existing governments. 47%, actually, the accountant corrected. I factored in the hidden assets your accountants thought nobody knew about. Also, your governments were going to collapse anyway. I just prefer to schedule these things efficiently. Kravek's probability calculations had been running continuously since the human arrived, and the results were finally becoming clear. You're serious. You genuinely believe one human can defeat the hegemony's entire force? I don't believe it, the accountant said, standing and straightening her suit jacket. I've already seen it happen. The engagement begins in 14 hours, 23 minutes. The outcome will be decided in exactly 17 minutes of combat time. 17 again? Gormath muttered. Humans and their obsession with lucky numbers. Not lucky, the accountant replied, walking toward the exit. Optimal. There's a difference, though most species never figure that out. She paused at the threshold between dimensions, her hand resting on the doorframe. Oh, and Kravek? You might want to liquidate your position in hegemony war bonds before the markets open tomorrow. Consider it professional courtesy. The door sealed behind her, with a sound like the universe clearing its throat. Around the table, some of the galaxy's most dangerous beings sat in stunned silence, each processing the implications of what they'd just witnessed. She's insane, the Keth crime lord finally declared. Completely, utterly mad. Probably, Kravek agreed, his multiple hands already working to calculate new odds. But I've been in this business for 4 centuries, and I've learned something important. Never bet against someone who does math during shuttle rides for fun. The crystallized regret continued to burn. But now it tasted different. Now it tasted like possibility, and that was the most dangerous flavor in the galaxy. Admiral Thex Mori stood before the holographic display aboard the hegemony dreadnought Inevitable Consequence, watching red dots representing human vessels scatter like startled insects across the tactical grid. His species, the Valkan, had perfected military doctrine over 8,000 years of continuous warfare. They understood battle the way poets understood meter. Every engagement followed patterns. Every victory had rhythm. Pathetic, muttered Commander Vexhai, her cybernetic implants casting blue shadows across her scarred face. Look at them flee. No formation discipline whatsoever. The bridge crew, a carefully selected mix of the hegemony's finest military minds, observed the retreating human formations with professional disdain. Species that had conquered entire sectors, beings whose ancestors had glass-bombed civilizations into submission, now watched something unprecedented, an enemy that seemed to actively avoid honorable combat. "Analysis, Strategic Coordinator Zephicus," Thexmori commanded, the spider-like being scuttled forward, his 8 legs clicking against the deck plating. "Human tactical doctrine appears centered around what they term strategic withdrawal," he reported, his translator struggling with the concept. "Our xenopsychology department suggests this stems from an evolutionary trait called self-preservation, though how a species develops interstellar travel while maintaining such cowardice remains unexplained." "They're buying time," suggested Tactical Officer Mordun, her crystalline form refracting the hologram's light into rainbow patterns, "waiting for reinforcements that will never come." Thexmori studied the display with the patience his species was renowned for. The Valkan measured campaigns in decades, not hours. Their retreat follows no logical pattern. Some fleets withdraw toward their colonies, others deeper into empty space. It's almost as if they have no unified command structure, Vexhai finished, which our intelligence confirms. Humans operate under something called independent contractors. Each fleet commander makes autonomous decisions based on personal profit margins. Meanwhile, several light-years away in the human command vessel Calculated Risk, Fleet Admiral Chen Moonrunner was having a very different conversation with her staff. "Profit margins," she repeated, looking at the communications transcript. "They actually believe we fight for individual profit margins." Her chief of operations, a woman whose ancestors had optimized supply chains across 3 galactic arms, shook her head in amazement. "The hegemony's entire intelligence apparatus spent 6 months infiltrating our mercenary networks. They never realized those were just our accounting departments." "To be fair," said the ship's AI coordinator, "when you translate quarterly earnings report into Valkan, it does sound like blood oath of territorial conquest." Admiral Moonrunner walked to the observation deck, where the stars looked exactly as they had for the past 17 battles. Distant, patient, and utterly indifferent to the small dramas being played out among them. Her staff followed, each carrying data tablets that contained information the hegemony would kill entire planets to possess. "Status report on Operation Bookkeeping," she requested. "Phase 17 complete," replied her strategic analysis officer. "The hegemony now believes we're a fractured alliance of competing warlords. They've adjusted their battle plans to account for our predictable infighting and inevitable betrayals." "And our actual positions?" "Every human vessel that retreated in panic is now positioned at precise coordinates throughout the system. The gravitational mathematics are elegant." The Admiral smiled, though anyone watching might have mistaken it for a grimace. Humans had learned long ago that the universe operated on principles far more reliable than honor, courage, or military tradition. Physics didn't care about your species' proud warrior heritage. Mathematics didn't respect your ancestors' conquest records. Back aboard the inevitable consequence, the hegemony fleet was making its final approach toward what their sensors identified as a single, isolated human vessel. "One ship," Commander Vexhai reported, "running minimal life support, weapons systems offline. It appears to be waiting." "Waiting for what?" Thexmori demanded. Strategic Coordinator Zepthkus consulted his analysis algorithms. "Psychological profile suggests this may be a ritual suicide. Several human cultures practice something called going down with the ship when facing certain defeat. Or, suggested Tactical Officer Morden, it's a trap." The bridge fell silent as every being present contemplated this possibility. In 8,000 years of Valkan military history, exactly 3 enemies had attempted to trap their forces. All three civilizations were now archaeological curiosities. "What kind of trap could one ship possibly represent?" Thexmori asked. "Our fleet comprises 12,000 vessels. Our combined firepower could crack a moon in half." "Human psychology remains largely incomprehensible," Zephicus admitted. "Their decision-making processes seem to involve factors we classify as irrational variables. For instance, they regularly make choices based on something called hunches." Hunches? "Decisions made without complete information, based on pattern recognition and intuitive analysis. Our computers cannot model it effectively." Admiral Thexmori studied the tactical display once more. One human ship, apparently defenseless, sitting in empty space like a gift. Around it, the full might of the hegemony fleet formed attack formations that had been perfected across millennia of successful campaigns. "Signal all vessels," he commanded. "Standard encirclement pattern. We'll give this lone human the honor of witnessing proper military doctrine before we vaporize them." "Should we attempt communication first?" asked Vexhai. "Offer terms of surrender?" "Number. They've had 17 opportunities to surrender with dignity. This ends now." As the massive hegemony fleet moved into position, their sensors registered something curious. The human vessel was broadcasting a single repeating signal on all frequencies. Not a distress call, not a surrender plea, not even a defiant last message. It was a number, 17. "What does it mean?" Mordun asked. Zephicus consulted his xenopsychology databases. "Uncertain. Humans have documented obsessions with certain numerical sequences. This could be religious significance, cultural meaning, or simply random noise." "Or," suggested a voice from the communications station, "it could be a countdown." Admiral Thexmori was about to ask what they were counting down to when the first gravitational anomaly registered on their sensors. The universe, it turned out, had a sense of irony. For precisely 17 seconds, the hegemony's most decorated military commanders stared at their instruments in the kind of silence typically reserved for discovering your gods were actually tax accountants. The gravitational readings made no sense. Space itself was bending in ways that violated several fundamental laws of physics, or at least the hegemony's understanding of them. "Sensor malfunction?" Commander Vexhai asked hopefully. "Negative," replied the crystalline tactical officer, her prismatic form refracting panic into visible spectrum. "Multiple independent confirmations. Space-time is reorganizing itself." Inside the lone human vessel, Lucky 17, Captain Marcus the Calculator Morrison was having the time of his life. His ship's view screen showed 12,000 enemy vessels arranged in what he recognized as Formation Pattern Zeta 7, a classic Vulcan encirclement maneuver, textbook perfect, and absolutely catastrophically predictable. "Final systems check," he announced to his crew of exactly one, an artificial intelligence that had been programmed with the personality of an overenthusiastic mathematics professor. "All gravitational resonance beacons show green across the board," the AI reported cheerfully. 17 strategic positions, 17 precisely calculated masses, 17 perfectly timed detonation sequences. The poetry of it brings tears to my optical sensors. "Area, you don't have tear ducts." "It's a metaphor, Captain. I thought you humans appreciated metaphors." Morrison grinned as he watched the hegemony fleet complete their encirclement. Perfect formation, perfect spacing, perfect positioning over the gravitational mines his retreating colleagues had spent months strategically placing throughout the system. "We do appreciate metaphors, Area, especially metaphors about turning asteroid fields into kinetic artillery." The hegemony commanders were still trying to understand what their sensors were telling them when strategic coordinator Zephicus made a discovery that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his natural lifespan. "Admiral," he chittered, his 8 legs tapping out complex anxiety patterns on the deck. I've been analyzing the human retreat patterns from the past 17 engagements. What about them? They weren't random. Each withdrawal followed precise mathematical calculations. Every panicked flight positioned human vessels at specific coordinates throughout this system. Admiral Thex Mori felt something his species hadn't experienced in 8 millennia of continuous warfare. The cold realization that they were the ones being hunted. Show me. The holographic display shifted, revealing the true scope of what had been happening. 17 battles, 17 careful retreats, 17 precisely calculated positions that formed a 3-dimensional web throughout the star system. Each defeated human fleet had left behind something the hegemony sensors had dismissed as debris, devices that were now revealing their true purpose. Gravitational amplifiers, Mordoun whispered, her crystalline form turning a shade that roughly translated to existential horror. They've turned the entire system into a weapon. Impossible, Vexhai snarled. The computational requirements alone would be manageable, interrupted a new voice on their communications channel. Captain Morrison's image appeared on their main screen, and he looked insufferably calm for someone facing annihilation. If you assume your opponents are intelligent, surrender now, Admiral Thex Mori commanded, and your death will be swift. Counter-proposal, Morrison replied, checking his chronometer. You surrender now, and maybe some of your crews survive what happens in approximately 30 seconds. You're one ship against our entire fleet. No, Morrison corrected. I'm one ship plus Newton's laws of motion, Einstein's theory of general relativity, and roughly 47 billion tons of strategically positioned asteroidal matter that's about to receive some very specific kinetic instructions. The first explosion wasn't much to look at. A small gravitational resonance beacon detonating near what the hegemony had catalogued as Asteroid Cluster 7 Alpha. But the chain reaction that followed rewrote several textbooks on applied physics. What's happening? Thex Mori demanded, as his ship's hull began groaning under forces that shouldn't exist. Cascade amplification, Morrison explained helpfully. Your fleet is positioned at the gravitational focal points of a system-wide kinetic array. We spent 6 months calculating the optimal mass distribution to turn this asteroid belt into the galaxy's largest shotgun. You very kindly arranged yourselves as the target. The second detonation triggered 17 more, each one precisely timed to redirect asteroidal debris into a convergent barrage that would make supernovas look like gentle rainfall. The hegemony's perfect formation became their perfect doom. Every ship positioned exactly where human mathematics had predicted they would be. This is impossible, Strategic Coordinator Zephicus wailed as his calculations collapsed into mathematical chaos. No species could coordinate timing this precise across multiple light hours of space. That's your problem, Morrison replied, as rocks the size of moons began accelerating toward the trapped fleet. You keep thinking about warfare in terms of courage and honor and traditional tactics. We think about it in terms of physics and logistics and optimal resource allocation. Commander Vexhai watched in fascination as her tactical display showed the incoming destruction with perfect clarity. Thousands of asteroids, each following ballistic trajectories that intersected with hegemony vessel positions with surgical precision. How long have you been planning this? Since before we met you, Morrison admitted. We ran projections on 17 different first contact scenarios, aggressive military, expansion ranked 3rd most likely. We've been preparing accordingly. The irony was perfect. The hegemony's greatest strength, their rigid adherence to proven military doctrine, had become the foundation of their defeat. Every formation they used, every tactical decision they made, followed patterns that human computers had analyzed and predicted with mathematical certainty. As the first wave of kinetic death reached the outer formations, Admiral Thexamori realized something that would have impressed him if he'd had more than 18 seconds left to live. Humanity hadn't just won this battle. They'd played an entirely different game. "You magnificent bastards," he whispered, watching his fleet's destruction unfold with the terrible beauty of perfectly calculated physics. "You turned mathematics into artillery." "Close," Morrison corrected, as the Lucky 17 began its own carefully plotted escape trajectory. "We turned artillery into accounting. There's a significant difference, though most species figure that out too late." The cascade reached critical mass 17 seconds later, exactly as projected. Back in Kravik's dimensional parlor, reality was experiencing what economists would later classify as a catastrophic market correction. The holographic displays showed feeds from across 17 sectors as financial networks processed the impossible. The hegemony's invincible armada had just become an expanding cloud of superheated plasma and very expensive scrap metal. "Well," said Gormath the Vile, watching his net worth evaporate in real time, "that's problematic." The Keth crime lord's biomechanical implants were sparking, a sure sign that his probability calculators had just divided by 0. "My pension fund was entirely invested in hegemony military bonds. I'm financially ruined." "Join the club," muttered the Zelani ambassador, her bioluminescence flickering between bankruptcy blue and existential crisis orange. "My entire civilization's economy was built on war profiteering. Without ongoing conflicts, we'll have to find actual jobs." Kravik, to his credit, was taking his impending poverty with the philosophical acceptance of someone who'd been gambling with civilizations for 4 centuries. "I must admit," he said, shuffling his probability cards with increasingly desperate precision, "I didn't see this outcome in any of my calculations." "That," said the accountant, materializing in the center of the room like a tax audit made flesh, "is because you were calculating the wrong variables." She hadn't knocked. She hadn't used the door. She had simply arrived, carrying a briefcase that radiated the kind of menace usually associated with final notices and audit reports. "How?" demanded Gormath, his 3 hearts beating in patterns that suggested imminent cardiac failure. "This parlor exists outside normal space-time. The dimensional locks alone should prevent—" "Dimensional locks are just mathematics made physical," the accountant replied, settling into her chair as if she owned it, which, technically, she now did. "And mathematics, gentlemen, is humanity's native language." She opened her briefcase, revealing documents that made the assembled crime lord's blood run cold. Ownership transfers, asset seizure orders, bankruptcy declarations written in languages that shouldn't exist, yet somehow perfectly described their current situation. "Let me explain what just happened," the accountant continued, her voice carrying the terrifying calm of someone who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with sufficient application of spreadsheet software. "For the past 18 months, humanity has been running the galaxy's largest insider trading scheme." "Impossible," the Zelani ambassador protested. "Insider trading requires advanced knowledge of market-moving events, and nobody knew the battle's outcome." "Wrong again," the accountant interrupted. "We knew the outcome because we designed it. Every human defeat, every strategic retreat, every panicked evacuation was choreographed to manipulate galactic financial markets. While you were betting on military victories, we were engineering economic conquest." She produced a data tablet that projected holographic charts showing 2 years of carefully orchestrated market manipulation. Every human military loss had triggered predictable alien investments in hegemony war bonds, military contractors, and conquest-related industries. Phase 1, she explained, highlighting sections of the display, was establishing the pattern. Humans lose battles. Aliens profit from our apparent weakness. Simple behavioral conditioning. Phase 2 was the escalation. We allowed our defeats to become more spectacular, more profitable for those betting against us. Every loss drove more investment into anti-human assets. Krevek's multiple hands were trembling as he realized the scope of what he'd witnessed. The entire galactic economy was artificially inflated by investments in our eventual defeat, the accountant confirmed. 47% of all galactic wealth tied up in assets that depended on humanity's continued failure, which brings us to Phase 3. The holographic display showed the catastrophic market crash that had begun exactly 17 minutes ago, the moment the hegemony fleet had discovered that physics didn't negotiate. One battle, she continued. One victory. One economic collapse that transferred the majority of galactic wealth into human-controlled accounts. We didn't conquer the galaxy through military might. We bought it at fire sale prices during the panic selling. The silence that followed was the kind typically reserved for supernovas, and the realization that your entire worldview had been constructed from lies and wishful thinking. You crashed the galactic economy, Gormith whispered, just to get a bulk discount on civilization? Bulk discount is underselling it, the accountant replied. We acquired approximately 63% of galactic infrastructure for roughly 12 cents on the standard credit. The logistics alone saved us centuries of traditional conquest. The Kith crime lord's implants finally gave up trying to process the mathematics and simply began displaying error messages. But the cultural implications, the destabilization of established power structures, the societal chaos, will be efficiently managed through proper resource allocation and strategic transition planning, the accountant said, producing another set of documents. We've prepared comprehensive reconstruction protocols. Most species won't even notice the ownership change. We're keeping existing management structures in place wherever possible. You're treating galactic conquest like a corporate merger, the Zilani ambassador said, her scales now displaying colors that didn't exist in any known emotional spectrum. Because that's exactly what it is. Military conquest is expensive, inefficient, and tends to damage the infrastructure you're trying to acquire. Economic conquest preserves assets while eliminating competitors. Much cleaner. Krevek, despite facing complete financial ruin, couldn't help but feel a grudging admiration for the audacity of it all. The mathematical complexity alone, coordinating market manipulation across 17 sectors while simultaneously orchestrating military deception on this scale. Was Tuesday, the accountant finished. We also restructured the Andromeda shipping lanes and optimized 3 different tax codes before lunch. She stood, closing her briefcase with the satisfied click of someone whose calculations had balanced to the last decimal point. Your assets will be transferred to human administration within 72 hours. Don't worry, we're prepared to offer employment opportunities to qualified candidates. Employment? Gormath managed to wheeze. Accounting positions, primarily. It turns out that running a galaxy requires extensive bookkeeping and will need experienced staff to handle the transition. The pay is competitive, and the benefits package includes comprehensive health coverage and a retirement plan that doesn't depend on successfully predicting military outcomes. As she moved toward the dimensional exit, the former galactic power brokers sat in stunned contemplation of their new reality. The universe hadn't changed. The same stars burned, the same physics applied, the same fundamental forces governed existence. But somehow, without anyone quite noticing when or how, accountants had inherited everything. One more thing, the accountant said, pausing at the threshold between dimensions. Next time you want to bet against humanity, remember that we don't just calculate odds, we calculate outcomes. There's a 17 decimal place difference. The door sealed behind her with a sound like a ledger closing, leaving behind only the gentle hum of mathematics having the last laugh.